Welcome to Your Future Starts Now, the go-to podcast for extraordinary women who are ready to step into their next chapter with authentic confidence. I'm your host, Gia Lacqua, empowerment coach, motivational speaker, children's book author, and girl mom. Whether you're a corporate powerhouse or an entrepreneur, this show is designed for you. Your Future Starts Now is more than just a podcast. It's a movement towards rewriting the rules of success for high-achieving women. Are you ready to get unstuck and step into your next chapter? If so, you're exactly where you need to be. Your future starts now. Welcome to Your Future Starts Now. I'm your host, Gia Lacqua. I want to thank you for tuning in today. I am thrilled to introduce you to Erica Komisar. Erica is a clinical social worker, psychoanalyst, and parent guidance expert who's been in private practice in New York City for over 30 years. She's a psychological consultant bringing parenting workshops to clinics, schools, corporations, and childcare settings. She's a contributor to the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, and the New York Daily News. She's also a contributing editor to the Institute for Family Studies and appears regularly on Fox and Friends and Fox 5 News. Erica is the author of Being There, Why Prioritizing Motherhood in the First 3 Years Matters, and Chicken Little, The Sky Isn't Falling, Raising Resilient Adolescents in the New Age of Anxiety. Erica, so excited to chat with you today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So today we are talking about the most important job in the world, which is parenting. So before we dive into that, Erica, tell us a little bit about your backstory and what led you to the work that you're doing today.
Well, I'm a social worker and a psychoanalyst, and my specialty is parent guidance. And how I got into this work is about 35 years ago when I started my practice. I was seeing, a huge number of children, and it seemed to be getting bigger every day, who were being diagnosed with mental disorders such as ADHD or behavioral problems or even depression and anxiety, things we hadn't seen in such young children. So they were increasing in numbers at an early age, but they were also increasing in numbers in adolescence, and the suicide ideation and suicide rates were also going up. So I was seeing this happening many years ago, decades ago, well before the technology boom, well before COVID. So even though there was a spike because of technology and a spike because of COVID, this was already happening. And I, in my practice in New York, was seeing a connection between the children who seemed the most disturbed and the kids whose mothers were the most absent. And so I thought, that's, sort of interesting. I'm going to look at some of the attachment research and the neuroscience. And so I started delving for about 13 years into the neuroscience research, the epigenetics research, the attachment research, and all this, reread all of my psychoanalytic books. And, really over those 13 years, saw that the research backed up what I was seeing, which is that the kids that I was seeing that were really struggling were the ones who had attachment disorders and had developed sort of what we call pathological defenses in response to feeling unsafe, feeling attachment insecurity, essentially. And so I decided I want to write a book because the number of people I could reach in my practice was more limited. So I wrote the first book, trying to reach as many parents, social workers, policymakers as I could, because my intention also was to try to influence the government with the idea of paid leave, because, that's always used as an argument. When I wrote my book, everybody was like, well, you're an elitist. I'm like, I'm not an elitist because I wrote this book. So we're not allowed to talk about real, true things if they make people feel bad. But the reality is, unless we make people feel bad, unless we make the government feel bad, no one changes. So we're in this sort of position in our society where we're not allowed to say anything that's uncomfortable to anyone. And yet sometimes when we say things that are uncomfortable, that make people feel uncomfortable, whether it's mothers who feel uncomfortable or fathers or government officials, then we have the possibility of change. So that's why I wrote the first book. And then I wrote a second book called Chicken Little, which was about adolescence, which is the second critical period of brain development. to help parents understand that you have a second chance. If you miss the first window from 0 to 3, you have from 9 to 25 to make a real difference in your child's ability to regulate their emotions and deal with stress in the future and be healthy.
Wow, incredible.
Mm-hmm.
So in the first 3 years of development, I know the research shows that children need their mothers, right? And that develops your attachment type. I also am curious as to why specifically the mother, right? Why not a father, a grandmother, a caregiver?
Well, I mean, what's interesting is I think if you ask most mothers, who is the primary attachment figure? What do you think most mothers are going to say?
They are.
Mm-hmm. Even if they work 12 hours a day
Yep.
and are only home on weekends, they're still
Mm-hmm.
going to say, well, it's me. And the reality is, John Bowlby says that the primary attachment figure is the person that is there to soothe the baby from moment to moment throughout the day, the majority of the time in the first 3 years. That is the primary attachment figure. And babies need a primary attachment figure who is the center of their universe and the source of their security. So babies aren't like adults. Even adults we couple, we need to couple with someone. Why is an intimate relationship with one person different than an intimate relationship with many people? But babies are not like adults. They can have relationships with many people, but they have one unique relationship with the person that is their maypole, the person around which they consider the source of their security. It's usually the mother, and there are reasons why, because mothers are different than fathers in terms of nurturing behaviors. So children in the first 3 years, well, first of all, mothers have a biological connection to their children if they gave birth to their children. But even mothers who are adoptive mothers have been shown to produce hormone which women produce in great quantities called oxytocin. So mothers produce it when they give birth, when they breastfeed, and when they nurture their very young. And even mothers who are adopted mothers can produce tremendous amounts of oxytocin, but oxytocin is the love hormone, it's the bonding hormone. It makes mothers' behavior more sensitive, empathic, and nurturing. That means that mothers are very fine-tuned because of this hormone to tune into baby's distress, which is critical for that baby to be healthy in the future. So how we lay down the foundation for that child's security is that we keep the stress quite minimal. In the first year to 3 years. We keep it quite minimal. We introduce stress incrementally, but we're basically there for them physically and emotionally to help them to get adjusted to this kind of harsh, cruel world that they live in. They've come from the womb where they're completely protected and surrounded, and now they're out in the world. But the way we help them to understand that the world is tolerable, that frustration is tolerable, that they can deal with stress, is that we don't overwhelm their neurological systems with stress too early. And that means that we keep them with skin to skin contact. We keep them close to our bodies. We soothe them from moment to moment when they're in distress. I mean, in other parts of the world, babies are worn on their mother's bodies in the front until the mothers can't carry them on the front anymore, and then they're worn on the back. And then they're kept at the mother's heels for the first 3 years. So this is an evolutionary sort of thing that's happened over thousands of years to help our young to feel secure in this world, because as mammals, we're a mammal that it probably has our young for the longest period of time so critically fragile. And so, so mothers are biologically necessary. Now, when fathers stay home, they produce a little more oxytocin. Fathers don't produce as much oxytocin. But when they do produce it, it comes from a different part of their brain, and it has a different impact on their behavior. It makes their behavior more playfully, tactily stimulating. What does that mean? The mother will tune into the baby's distress and kneel down and give the baby a hug and reflect the baby's sadness and fear and help regulate those emotions and bring that baby back to homeostasis. Whereas the father, it will tickle the baby, distract the baby out of their mood, throw the baby up in the air. It's all about moving the baby away from pain as quickly as possible. And they're also very good at teaching through play. Resilience to stress and exploration helps them to take risks and separating, basically. But you don't want to teach a baby to separate when they're supposed to be attaching. Separation comes later, and it comes at the skirts of the mother. So the baby knows the mother's there, and then the baby can play with the father, but the baby can always go back to the mother for comfort. So, and if you doubt this, you go to the park and you look at the way father's mother and the way mother's mother.
Yeah, I don't doubt you. I am laughing because I've seen
You're
it throughout
laughing
my
because
life.
that is what happens. That
It
fathers
is so
are not.
true.
There was research done where mothers and fathers lay side by, because I know you have a big population that listens to your podcast that are, top executives, and they're women, and they're like, my
Yeah.
husband raises the baby and it's the same thing. Well, I'm going to tell you right now, it's not the same. As much as you'd like to believe that and justify that it's the same thing, it's not the same thing. There was research done in England where mothers and fathers lay side by side in bed. And when the baby cried, a distress cry, the mothers woke up immediately and got up and soothed the baby. The fathers slept through the distress cry. But when the leaves rustled outside the window, the fathers woke up and the mothers slept through it. Now, what's that about? Because fathers produce a different hormone called vasopressin. Mothers also produce a little bit of it, but it's not as prevalent in mothers. It's called the protective aggressive nurturing hormone. And what it does is it makes fathers more, just as it says, protective and aggressive against predators. So fathers are important too. And fathers are also critical when it comes to encouraging separation. So what I'm finding in my practice is that there are a lot of single mothers by choice or single mothers and who are not by choice. And those children of those mothers have a much harder time separating than the children who have fathers. They also have a harder time regulating emotions like aggression and risk-taking behavior that fathers help to regulate. So, basically we're fooling ourselves by thinking that mothers and fathers are fungible. They're not fungible. They're different. So why we need to be the same, I'm not sure. I think it's a justification for leaving our children, either fathers or mothers, but they're not the same.
Fascinating. The biological component and the hormones. It's so interesting. So we're talking to, as you mentioned, what I like to refer to as the do-it-all generation of women. And with very good intention, we were told you can do it all.
At a very young age.
At a very young age. And again, with good intention, but somewhere along the lines, we internalize that message to mean we have to do it all. And we find ourselves rising to that challenge. Yeah, I can do it all. And then it isn't until once our physical and mental health start to deteriorate that we then question, do I really want it all? Is this what I'm striving for? And so, it's an important topic because, as you mentioned, women who are trying to juggle it all and be perfect in every facet of life, show up at work at 100%, have a successful career, and be, a good spouse and a great mother. It doesn't set us up for success. And I love that you talk about these hard topics. I mean, the work that you do, it's a hard truth, but it's an important truth. And that's what we do on this podcast. And so the mom guilt is very, very real. I would love to just talk about the mom guilt aspect of knowing that we need to be there, knowing we should be there. But in a lot of cases, we also have to work, it'd be a second income. Maybe we're the full-time income, maybe we're the breadwinner in the family. So what are some tips, tools, strategies that you have, advice you have for managing through that mom guilt?
Well, so one thing I would say is that you can have it all. You just can't have it all at the same time. So what we tell young women is that you can have it all at the same time. And that's a lie, because you can't.
Yep.
You'd say you're only as happy as your least happy child. And what's happening is children are breaking down because they're not being prioritized. Right. So the prioritizing of children in the first, particularly in these critical periods of brain development, um, is critical to their mental health. And no one's saying that. That's why I speak out, because it was disturbing to me that out of political correctness for the women's movement, we weren't saying what was obvious, which is you can be a very successful professional woman. I'm a professional woman, but in the years that I was raising my children, I put my career pretty much aside. I kept my toe in it. I mean, really, like a little bit, like one patient a day. As they got older, two patients a day. So when my children were still home and not grown teenagers, I was seeing 10 hours of patients a week. And you'd say, well, how did I afford that? And it was something my husband and I had planned, took planning.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't take vacations much at all, very, very little, minimal vacations. We didn't do fancy stuff. We took all the fancy stuff off. We weren't buying new clothes. We weren't buying new strollers. We weren't spending a lot of money in those years. My money that I earned was to pay a nanny, because I had 3 children, to be beside me and co-parent, because my husband was really busy and he would come home and he would love our children, but he wasn't really helping to raise them. Weekends he was there. So it was me and the nanny and our 3 kids, and we were doing tag team, and and we were doing it together. And she was about 58 years old when I hired her. So she was like, my mother was ill, and then my mother passed away. My father passed away when I was young. So, I didn't really have a lot of family. I paid my nanny to be my mother, essentially, because my mother was ill.
Mm-hmm.
So, I guess what I would say to women who are professional is that, you have a long, long life to do whatever you want to do professionally and be successful. I would say my career didn't take off until I was about 50. And I interview a lot of people for the book. Nita Lowey, one of the most longstanding members of the House in Washington, didn't start her career until she was in her 40s in politics. She raised, I think, 5 kids. She didn't start her career till she was in her 40s. So I don't know what the rush is. I don't know why, we can have very highly successful careers before we have children. Then once we have children, take kind of a break, or maybe work part-time, or reduce the intensity of our work, or maybe take time off and then go back. And what I say is that if you go back after you have children, you often end up finding that your priorities are different. So it's something about the mentality of working women that they feel nothing should change. There's no transformation. When you have a baby, everything changes. Your priorities shift. You transform. If you're healthy, if you've had a healthy enough upbringing yourself, or a healthy enough attachment to your own mother, then when your baby is born, you feel what we call maternal preoccupation, a pull towards your baby, not a pull towards your work.
Mm-hmm.
If you can't wait to get away from your baby, that means you probably suffered from an attachment disorder yourself, or had some kind of conflict with your own relationship with your mother that needs to be looked at. That's not a normal reaction to having a baby. The normal reaction instinctually is to be drawn to your baby and to be preoccupied with your baby. And when you're away from your baby, to feel guilt. So people think guilt is a pathological response. It's actually a signal feeling, like pain. If you break your ankle and your ankle hurts, you're not supposed to keep walking on your ankle, and no one's going to tell you, oh, just ignore the pain, keep going, keep walking. You go to the doctor, you get it checked out, you get in a boot, you have to take it easy, you can't run on the ankle, right? So guilt is sort of our way of signaling that we're in conflict. It's our way of signaling that we're in pain because of the conflict. And so society tells us, because they want us all out in the workforce and making lots of money, they don't care about children. Society tells us just ignore the feeling. And I'm telling you right now, don't ignore the feeling. It's an important feeling. It's an instructive feeling. You may not be able to stop working entirely, but maybe by looking at that internal conflict, you come up with a better resolution than the one you have. Right?
Yeah.
And so, we as a society don't really understand what guilt is. Guilt is actually, if it's excessive, if even when you're there with the baby, you feel guilty, then maybe there's a neurotic thing going on. Maybe there's something to look at. But guilt in and of itself means our egos are working and our conscience is working, and that we're attached to our baby. So why we tell mothers it's not healthy? The other thing is, at a young age, we tell young women that careers should be primary in their lives. And we tell them, pick a career right now at 15 years old, anywhere between 15 and 21. Pick a career that you want to go gung ho with. Okay. We don't tell young women to think about their whole life. We don't tell them to think about create a life for yourself, not just a career. And so what these young women do is they say, I want to be a Supreme Court judge. I want to be CEO of a major Fortune 500 company. I want to be a partner in a law firm. I want to be an attending at a major hospital, and they go, that's great. I want to be a doctor, a lawyer, whatever. But then they don't think about the whole life that goes with those careers. So when I was 20 years old, 19 years old, I started doing internships in different fields. I must have done 5 or 6 internships. I worked in TV production. I worked on Capitol Hill. Every year I did a different, I worked in PR and the arts. I worked in PR and in cosmetics. I tried different things because I wanted to see not what the work was like, but what the life was like. And I wanted to see if I could find role models of who I wanted to be when I grew up, because I knew I wanted children and I knew I wanted a family. And I left all those fields, not because the work wasn't exciting, because the work was exciting and manic, but because the lives that these women had were terrible. And so instead, I thought, what can I do as a career that satisfies me, that I would like, but also that would help me have a whole life? I don't think we talk to young women like this, because if they thought about the fact that when you have children, you want to have control and flexibility. And to be honest, you don't want a boss. You want to be the boss. You don't want to have a boss. If we instructed young women of this, maybe they would choose more service fields. Maybe they would choose speech pathology. Maybe they would choose social work or being a therapist. Maybe they would choose being a coach. Maybe they would choose, anything within the service field where you have more control and flexibility. Maybe they would say, I want to be a lawyer, but I'm going to work not have to be a partner. Maybe I start my own little thing and make some money while I'm raising kids, But I think we really do young women a disservice when we tell them that the only thing you should think about is your career. Because if you don't think about your whole life, you end up going down a path that often you regret.
It's a great point. And I think you're right in the sense that we tend to deny our own realities. And it's very sad. It's a sad place to be when you think about it. And I love what you said about this holistic concept of planning your life. Nobody teaches us that at a young age. And it is very singularly focused on careers, which is great to know that, as a woman, you can be anything you want. You can be very career driven, but nobody prepares us for how do you balance that if you also want to have a family, if you also want to.
That's the key.
Yeah.
If you want to have a family.
Yeah.
So the women's rights movement gave us choices.
That's right.
And the choices were, you don't have to have children.
That's right.
You can be like men. Let's just say what it is. Okay. I always say that Gloria Steinem told us that we had to work in the work world to get away from the patriarchy of men. What she didn't tell you is that she pushed you into being the patriarchy of men. So she said, be like men. And that was the wrong message. The message should have been, be the best women you could be out in the world in a way that still allows you to be the best woman and the best mother. And right. But she didn't say that. She said, get away from the patriarchy. And she ended up pushing women into the patriarchy, where they work harder than men sometimes to prove that they're as good as men.
Yeah.
And they abandon all the goodness of being a woman.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So the best is that you have choice. You don't have to have children to have a generative, happy life. You can have a life without children, be a CEO of a company, have a linear career like men have, become a partner in a law firm without a beat, right? Without taking a step or a beat away from it. And if you're going to have children and you try to be on that path, what I was seeing in my practice is those children were suffering greatly. And if they don't suffer when they're little, they suffer when they're older. And, the best way to know is not if your children break down in the first 3 years, but do you get through the first 25 years without your children breaking down?
It's a long time.
Yeah, because sometimes the damage doesn't show up right away.
Of course. Of course.
Sometimes the damage doesn't show up until they're in adolescence.
Yes.
And, and again, it's not as if there's nothing you can do. In adolescence, you can make different choices too.
Sure.
But obviously, if you miss the first window, it's harder.
Yeah. But it's good to know that we have that second window. And
Mhm.
I love what you said about, the patriarchy. And I can tell you from personal experience, over 20 years ago when I started in corporate America, I remember distinctly having this concept in my mind of be like a man, right?
Yep.
Don't wear bright colors, don't wear pink nail polish, and, act like a man. And I think it's incredibly fascinating that 20 plus years later, now we're talking about what is good leadership. And we are talking about being vulnerable and being authentic and having empathy and compassion, right? And, those were all the things I threw out the window because I thought it wasn't work like, it wasn't professional.
But we're
Right.
still talking about the bottom line.
We're still talking about
And the bottom line is a male concept. So
Yeah.
you say, again, there's nothing wrong with going
No.
that path, but then don't have children.
Right.
Don't do that to your children, and don't do it to yourself, because in the end, you're going to be miserable if you have unhappy children or mentally ill children.
Yeah.
Don't have children. Get dogs. Even dogs need attention, but the concept is that we really don't think about the whole of things. We just think in parts. We're
Yes.
almost obsessionally caught up in thinking about the parts of our life, and
It's
we need
easier,
to think
right?
about the whole. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's easier, but certainly not beneficial by any means. And so on this concept, while we're talking about leadership, I know that you do some work in this area as well. I would love your thoughts on, because I'm very passionate about this as well, how parenting is really a training ground for being a good leader and looking at that as an analogy. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, think about all the things that mothering teaches you. It teaches you about emotional regulation, because you can't be a good enough mother unless you can regulate your own emotions. And if you start by going into parenting without the ability to regulate your emotions, if you blow up a lot and you get super angry about small things and you're very impatient and you can't tolerate frustration, pretty quickly you learn that that's going to do a lot of harm to your children. And you end up coming to someone like me and saying, "Please help me. I realize I'm impatient. I rise to anger quickly. I get bored around my children." So it teaches you patience. It teaches you emotional regulation. It teaches you prioritization and what's really important. It recenters your value system. It teaches you about relational dynamics. If you have not just between you and your children, but between your children and other children, between your children and their siblings, within the family. So it even teaches relational dynamics between you and your spouse and how to negotiate as leaders of the family, working together as a team. So there's a lot of good things about being a mother that then lend themselves to, quote unquote, if you want to go into business later, if you want to be a leader. The other thing is we have so deprioritized mothering that we see it as lesser work. So if on your resume it says you took 3 years off to take care of your children, that should be a compliment to you, or that should be an asset to your resume, because now the employer says, this is a person who has good values, who values caregiving and values family, and understands that she needs to be all into something. And I'm going to reward her by giving her a chance to come back into the work world. And I'm even going to offer her part-time so she can still sort of stick by her values of her family.
Mm-hmm.
Why aren't we doing that? Instead, an employer looks at the resume and goes, she took time off. Who is she? She's mothered. What's mothering? It's not. I mean, really, we live in such a damaged society that deprioritizes the most important role, which is that of caretaking, whether it's caring for your children or caring for ill parents or caring for ill relatives, or, we really deprioritize the most important things. So when a woman wants to take time off to be a caregiver, she's looked down upon, right? Instead of, as you say, valuing all of the things she's learned by doing that.
Yeah. Huge, huge lessons in motherhood that I know personally and other women have brought to the workplace that have been incredibly valuable. So it is an important consideration. And now I'm seeing, I think there's an official term on LinkedIn that women are using for when they do take that maternity break to label the years that they did take off, which is nice to see instead of just having that blank space. Erica, what advice do you give to parents who are struggling with the challenges of modern parenting, the external pressures of society? How do we change some of these dynamics?
Well, if you're talking about changing society, I would say I still don't understand why every woman in America isn't on board in a group with really advocating for paid leave. So
Yeah.
every woman has the ability to stay home with their child, at least for the first year and up to the first 3 years, at least, of part-time work. Why we don't advocate for that as a group, I think because we've split into two groups: working women and stay-at-home women, and they don't seem to get along. They look down upon each other. And so I'm thinking, is this what we need? No, we need to pool together and
Yeah.
say, whether or not you want to have children, whether or not you want to raise your children, every woman should have the ability to stay home with their children, because it's better for children and it's better for mothers, that they're
Mhm.
not torn into pieces by feeling constantly in a state of conflict. And so, yeah, that would be the first thing. Advocate, whether, grab hold of a friend of yours who's a stay-at-home mom, if you're a working mom, and say, we're not different, we're the same.
Mhm.
We may have made different choices in the short run, but in the long
Yeah.
run, we want the same choices for women. We don't do that. So did women split women, or did men split women? Or did Gloria Steinem split women? I mean, who split women in half? So we feel in a binary fashion so sort of discrepant from one another, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is, take a look at your whole life and think about how happy you are. Because I would say most women who work full time and have children, most of them are not very happy.
Mhm.
And if they are quote unquote happy, as soon as they hit a bump in the road, whether it's one of their children starts to show signs of struggle, or one of their children is diagnosed with ADHD, or one of their children is not coming out of their room and feeling very depressed and maybe talking about suicide, everything stops for that woman. So I would say, stop, pause. A pause is a good thing, and really reflect with your partner, whoever that is, your spouse, reflect on, am I happy? Is this life the life that I want to live? Is this a balanced life? Am I really able to prioritize what is important to me? And, and listen to yourself. If the answer is no, I'm not happy. No, my children are not happy. Open your eyes, listen to yourself, take action.
Yeah. That's
And that
such great
doesn't mean,
advice.
as you say, some women have to work to support their families. We're not talking about not working. We're talking about the kind of work you do. We're
Mhm.
talking about the amount of work you do. We're talking about the intensity and degree of the work that you do.
Sure.
Mm.
Yeah, I think there's also incredible stigma for women who have been working towards climbing that ladder, and then for them to either pause or take a step back or,
Terrible,
right,
terrible
quote unquote,
stigma.
coast. I have women coming to me who are at a point in their career where they've been striving. They say, I think I'm okay coasting right now. And there's such stigma attached to that. And it's so sad to
It's
see,
very
right?
sad. It's very, so, again, I was, it's intentionality.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
what I would say. I think we end
Absolutely.
up in these careers without great
Yeah.
intentionality. We end up
Yeah.
with blinders on.
Yes.
And I would say, like when I was 18 and I was 19 and 20, and looking at all these different women and all the lifestyles and how they were leaders and what they were leading. And, I was already putting the pieces together that these women weren't really that happy.
Yeah.
They were overworked. They didn't have space for themselves. If they had children, someone else was raising their children,
Yeah.
nannies or fathers or daycare and don't get me on the subject of daycare, but and so no one was happy. And I
Yeah.
was like, gosh, this is miserable. Let me find a career where I can control it. Let me find an entrepreneurial pursuit where I have control over how much I work, how intensely I work, how much I earn. So why we're not telling young women to think in terms of that, I'm not sure. Instead, we tell them to go into the corporate world, which is still primarily, even if it's not run by men, it's a male structure. It's a
100%.
structure designed by men that women take over and say, we can do it better than men, but they end up doing it like men.
It needs
It's
to be
a corporate
changed.
structure.
Yeah.
If a woman says, I want to work part-time, they're like, no, you can't work part-time.
It needs to
You work
evolve.
full-time.
Yeah.
Or I need to take a year off. No, you can't take a year off. You have 3 months off. And, so what is that? That's a male structure. That's not
Yeah.
a women's structure. That's not for women or for children.
Agreed, 100%. And the other thing I would add to about what you just said is I think it's also important for women to support women and men to support women in those decisions, right? Because it's
Yeah.
really hard in those pivotal moments when we have to make a hard call of, taking a break, taking a sabbatical, stepping back in a job, not taking the promotion that we've been offered, and just supporting whatever decision that is and not being so critical of the decision and really just supporting each other and where we are in our
You
course.
made a good point, which is young men are also taught that women are quote unquote equal in every way, should carry their burden of the finances of the family. And so what it doesn't talk about is complementarity when you're raising children. It doesn't talk about division of labor. It says we're both the same. And what that ends up doing is corrupting marriages. And I'll tell you why. Because you have two people who are competing for the same role. Never a good thing. Imagine two CEOs, co-CEOs. That never works, right? Co-CEOs. Because you want a CEO and you want a CFO and you want a COO. The reason is you don't want two people trying to do the same job. You want two people in a team doing different roles. I'm in marketing, but you're in finance, and we do different things. Yeah. But for some reason, when it comes to families, we've told young men and young women that we're exactly the same. We're going to bring in exactly the same amount of money. And women screw themselves over. They promise young men, I'm going to work forever and make tons of money, and we're going to get our second home and a second car, and we're going to go on vacations that are fancy, and we're going to send our kids to private, whatever. They promise men this instead of thinking holistically. You know what? I'm going to work really hard now before we have children. But when I have children, I may want to take off. I don't know how I'm going to feel. And I want that space. So whatever we need to do financially to make sure there's not so much pressure on us, I want to have choices when I have children. And that doesn't mean I'll never work again and never make money again. But I want to have choices. That's the promise that young couples should make to one another. And that's not what's happening.
Yeah.
Young men go into it thinking we're going to get this expensive mortgage and 2 cars and fancy vacations and schools. And then they say, you broke your promise to me. So I would say to young women, don't make that promise to the men that you're going to marry. Make sure it's a litmus test of how good a quality person that young man is.
Yeah.
To see, when we have children, I want to have choices. So let's not get ourselves into a financial situation that we feel trapped in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because then you don't have that agency.
And you don't have the agency.
Yeah. Great advice. Such great advice. And I love the advice around the intentionality and taking that pause. So no matter where you are in your journey, you have the ability to step back and take a moment to evaluate holistically, to your point. Am I happy? Am I living my purpose? Am I where I want to be? And it's okay to say no. It's scary. It's scary to admit to yourself that the answer might be no, but it is so critical, right? That you can shift and you can take a different path. So such incredible advice. Erica, I would love to know, in this podcast, we talk about redefining success. I would love to know how you define success for yourself and how has that definition evolved for you over time?
Well, I'm glad you used that word success and not happiness. But yes, so success is defined, I think, also in a very perverse way today. I think success today is defined materially. How far you've gone in your career, how much money you have, how much material success you have, how much fame you have. And I'm going to say, in the end, success is, as Freud said, success is defined this way. First, love. Secondly, meaningful work. But meaningful work always came second. But it is an important aspect of life. First, love and meaningful work. Meaningful work isn't necessarily highly paid work. Meaningful work doesn't mean being famous. Meaningful work could mean being a kindergarten teacher. Meaningful work could be being a speech pathologist. Meaningful work could mean being a lawyer who does family law for women who don't have access to it. Meaningful work can mean many things. Meaningful work could be being a banker. But the idea is that love has to always come first. And if you put work first, you will never be successful.
Mm-hmm. Beautifully, beautifully said. Thank you for that. Erica, where can our listeners learn more about you and the work that you do?
www.komisar, KOMISAR.com. You can reach out to me there, and you can buy my books there, and it tells you all about me there. And then you can also follow me on Instagram, Erica Komisar CSW, and also Twitter.
Perfect. So, Erica, thank you so much for being here, for sharing your insights and expertise. This was truly an incredible conversation that brought tears to my eyes. And I want to say also, thank you for normalizing the mom guilt. Such valuable advice and insights. Thank you so much. And of course, you can visit my website at gialacqua.com. Reach out to me on Instagram at gialacqua. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. This is Gia signing off with gratitude for your time and energy. Our mic drops, but the movement continues. Until next time, your next chapter is waiting. Take care.
That concludes another empowering episode of Your Future Starts Now. Before we wrap up, I want to thank this incredible community of high-achieving women. Your energy, resilience, and commitment to growth are the driving force behind what we do. If you enjoyed today's episode, please rate it, leave a review, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Your feedback fuels our mission to empower high-achieving women just like you. And of course, share Your Future Starts Now with the extraordinary women in your life who are also on a journey of healing and empowerment. Connect with us on social media, share your thoughts, let us know what topics you'd like to explore in future episodes. Stay connected on Instagram at gialacqua. I encourage you to carry the energy of this conversation into your day and keep on supporting the incredible women around you. Until next time, remember, your next chapter is waiting.